No one expected the MAGA Inquisition, but should you have? That is the question I'm asking today, and that's why I'm going to be reading from the Bible about things with witches. And for those of you who don't know, there's a skit or a sketch by Monty Python, the Monty Python group of the Spanish Inquisition. It's two people sitting in a room. You should pause this and actually watch it if you haven't seen it, but I'm just going to give an overview for those of you who have. Even if you have seen it, go watch it again, but I'll also just give a quick overview. Two people standing in a room. There's a man and a woman. They're talking about what happened the night before, and then the woman or the man asks each other one another, and they're like, okay, ask him a question about the stuff. And then like, well, I wasn't quite expecting a Spanish Inquisition. And then these three guys jump in. I think it's played by Michael Palin, Terry Jones, who recently died, and Terry Gilliam. And they come out and they're like, no one expects a Spanish Inquisition. And they start listing these things. Not off. And it's just talking about the Spanish Inquisition. It's talking about that in jest, but it was a horrible actual thing that occurred. People actually died from being questioned in this Spanish Inquisition. And the relation with this MAGA Inquisition, why I'm wearing this shirt, is part of that whole situation of I went and I got this shirt after watching the inauguration of Donald J. Trump in 2017. The day after, I walked around the Women's March and found these shirts with the friends I was there with, got these shirts. But since then, I was trying to understand what is with the hysterics. Why are they calling people on the political right this? Why is this a scarlet letter of sorts? It is similar to the witch hunt. And is it quite similar to the witch hunt? Because are people directly dying? Have they been direct deaths? Yeah, there have been some shootings, assessing this kind of situation, words kind of changing the situation, but what exactly is going on where this is a scarlet letter of sorts? In the past, somebody could be like, that person's a witch. What are the reasons you're saying the witch? People didn't really care. They're just like, that person's a witch, witch, burn the witch, take the witch down. And then you're either killed or taken out of society. Now there have been situations where people have been assaulted, people have been beaten up, people have lost jobs, people have lost friends, just from wearing that red MAGA hat. And with that kind of situation, I'm thinking this is the similarities. There are similarities. If I had seen what was going on as the religion that it is, as a dogma, as people of faith, having that kind of reaction to Donald Trump and whatever he stood for, it would make a lot more sense than I would have expected the MAGA Inquisition. And I think there's people on the political right now who are saying to combat this, we need more Jesus, we need more Christ. And I'm like, wait a minute, like Lee Corso, wait 1 second, or wait one, I forget what Lee Corso says. But anyway, he's that whole wait a minute thing. Because people on the political right, when the Christians were in power, they were doing things like the Spanish Inquisition, based on as frivolous, as lack of fact-based information as people on the political left are. The people on the political left don't really have that much reason to actually say what they're saying about the people. I haven't found that much reason. Just like in the past, we know there are no witches. I mean, some people might still think Harry Potter and those things are real, but it's in the Bible, and these people are saying we need that back. I'm like, no, I don't want that back either. I want us to go forward and be more rational. Let go of these things, basing things on faith and feels, which is just connected, which is just different forms of religion. Different forms. The left eating the left is just the same as Protestants fighting Catholics. It's just these different denominations and internecine violence and things like that. We need to let that stuff go and go forward with rational conversations, fact-based things, evidence-based things. Have more conversation and talk to each other and be like, okay, if you're going to do this and you expect somebody else to act in this way from it, what is your evidence? What proof do you have to back this up? Don't just say it's a thing of faith, a thing of feels, because those things don't really work. Those things destroy societies, destroy people, destroy lives. So on the screen, there's going to be a speed drawing of it. It's a really funny skit. It has something to do with like also wearing this. There was a guy wearing a bomber hat. Does anyone know why one of the characters is wearing a bomber hat? That's why I was wearing this red pick. I guess it's also going the red theme, the red hat type thing. Also superfluous, works for the superfluous nature. I think the cross is, which is a torture symbol. People wear it and like, what does that actually mean to you? You can tell I don't really comb my hair, so why do I have a comb? I guess I can comb my beard sometimes, but that's kind of going with the whole guy with the bomber hat. I was like, why is the guy wearing the bomber hat? Anyway, okay, so into the reading right now. The main point I'm trying to make here is, look, this stuff is actually in the Bible. This stuff is actually in there. People on the political left, are the things you're doing similar to this? Because a lot of people on the political left will claim themselves to be less religious or at least less devoutly Christian than I find people on the political right. Now, people on the political right, this is your book. If you are a Christian, this is the stuff. How have you rationalized yourself out of following these things that are actually in the Bible? Why do you think these things are not good, not appropriate, not ways to actually live? Or if you do, why do you think they are, and why don't you actually go out and find witches and stop them? But if you have a way of understanding that you guys used to do that, Christians used to do that, and think that was a way to do things, if you can understand how you rationalize yourself out of that, how you can compartmentalize and say this is not what we're going to do, maybe there's a better way for you to communicate with people on the political left, or at least understand where they're coming from, and find ways to communicate to them that, okay, this actually, I'm not a witch from wearing a MAGA hat. I'm not going to kill you. I don't have these magical powers. And then just a general question when it comes down to it. The Spanish Inquisition, the witch hunts. I know there's historical questions of how many people died and things like, even if one person died, that's one too many in my opinion. But when somebody says, like Donald Trump says, this is a witch hunt going on, what does witch hunt mean in that sense? Because people in the political right are like, yeah, this is a witch hunt. And I'm like, when you guys were actually doing witch hunts, is that actually what's happening with Trump right now? So when people on the political right are talking about they're under attack, how similar are the actual attacks to what actual people that you supported or you would have supported in the past, believing things that you say you believe when they were doing it? Just like I asked people on the political left, you're talking about socialism, you're talking about communism. What happens when those communist regimes or socialist regimes actually get in power? Is that not real socialism, not real communism? And is that in the past with the Spanish Inquisition not real Christianity, not real Catholicism, not real faith? Let me know. So I'm going to get into the reading now. And I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version, which is an English translation of the Bible published in 2001 by Crossway. It is a revision of the Revised Standard Version that employs an essentially literal translation philosophy. So this should be understandable to most people. I found this initial list on openbible.com. It was openbible.com. I'm pretty sure it is openbible.com. Let me double check. Yes, openbible.info. Excuse me. And then from openbible.info, I went to Bible Gateway, which is a good site. Bible Gateway, if you guys are not familiar with it, you go there, you put in the verse and the chapter and things like that, and then it gives you different versions of the Bible you can get to. In some cases, it points out some things, gives some explanations, some apologetics, some study things. So if you're just interested in it, I think it's a worthwhile place for you guys to go check out, and you can just get some good information from it. So about the reading, I'm going to give you the first three parts are going to be things where I actually read part of the chapter and or verses around the select verses that I found on openbible.info. Because on openbible.info they had about 100 verses, but some of them were taken from parts and then they would repeat some in some ways. And I also want to get away from the people who just say, oh, you took that out of context. So I want to read some of them within the context and then ask you, what do you think the context about this is? And then there's some other select verses I took that just have certain questions and certain things that were brought up, certain things that are claimed to exist as per the Bible. And I want you guys to kind of just give an opinion on what do you think about it. So, getting right into the reading, we're going to go with, this is going to be focusing on Exodus chapter 22, verse 18. And this is, for those of you who are familiar with Exodus, this is right after chapter 22, which has its instructions on keeping slaves, which is a very problematic, to some people like me, disgusting verse and chapter to have in a supposedly all good book written by an all good being, and he's giving directions on how to keep slaves, but that's ridiculous. But the title of this chapter is Laws About Social Justice. And that's an interesting thing, this chapter or subsection, but it's the social justice thing. As I've mentioned, I think there are very big familiarities as the social justice movement, the progressivism, the stativism, that also works too, is a religion. It's just the next step from Christianity. It has come from that. Part of the reason I'm making videos like this, reading things like that, interested in things like this, is because I have that background where I was into Christianity. I was also very into the state in that sense on the political left, and I'm seeing these similarities. Right now I'm seeing people on the political right who tend to be Christian, more Christian and religious, saying, oh, we need the Bible. And then the people on the left and the progressives, they're like, oh, we need the state in that sense. We need God, we need the state. Faith and feels, they're going together. So laws about social justice, this was what the Christians were doing. Even in my generation, 10, 20 years ago, this was the Christian right is doing what the progressive left is doing now. Okay, so laws about social justice, starting at verse 16. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. If a father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them, and they cry out to me, I will surely hear that cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a moneylender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him. If you take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. In what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. You shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with its mother. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. You shall be consecrated to me. Therefore you shall not eat any flesh that is torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. So there we have it. That's the first part. As I said, I was focusing on Exodus chapter 22, verse 18. I was focusing on verse 18 there, which was, you shall not permit a sorceress to live. And he just goes in there talking about if a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed, he lies with her, he has to give the bride price, and shall make her his wife. So this is just not sleeping with virgins. There is something about virgins a lot in the Bible. This is something, a common thing. Of course, this is common knowledge to many Christians, and people just know about Christianity with the female who gave birth to Jesus, Mary. She was a virgin, supposedly, at the time. But it jumps directly from that into talking about you shall not permit the sorceress to live. I don't see what the context. I think it's pretty clear. A sorceress should die in this situation. If you find somebody that is a sorceress, and if this is the Bible, this is God talking about this, saying, okay, we know sorceresses exist. If they do exist and you find them, you should not permit them to live. And it goes into this social justice situation. What are we talking about with social justice here? There's a current movement in the United States of America and the West and other places big upping single motherhood. Now, there's a difference between a single mother and a widow. Of course, a widow is a situation where the woman was married and the husband dies. But it's a similar situation, and it has been used interchangeably. But when they're talking about this situation here, you don't talk bad about them. And of course, it's living in a different time, where if you had sex with a virgin, you're supposed to marry her. And in this kind of culture and society, I'm guessing the father would also be into actually doing this. And of course, they put the stipulation if the father utterly refuses to give her to him, to the man who has slept with her, then there's that situation. But later on, of course, they have the whole thing of if you find somebody who's committed adultery, they should be stoned. So anyway, what is the context for this? What do you talk about in this situation? They're talking about you shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Is that some kind of sacrifice? Now, is that a direct sacrifice of killing them? Or is that saying the firstborn of every family should be a man of God, should be a preacher or somebody who goes out there and spreads the word? What is the context about that? But then they talk about here, okay, you shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with its mother, and on the 8th day you shall give it to me. What does that give it to me think? I don't think they mean just leave it out in the public, because a cow or sheep can't be a livestock in that sense, can't necessarily preach. So is that kill? So if you're talking about a similar situation, are you supposed to kill your son to God? I don't know. What is the context for that? Now back to the reading. We're going to Leviticus now, and we're going to be focusing on chapter 20, and it's going to be, the verses specifically are going to be chapter 20, verse 6 and 27. Those are going to be the ones I'm focusing on, but as I mentioned, I'm going to be putting this in context and reading around that verse, or the verses. Okay, so this first section, starting at chapter 20, is called Punishment for Child Sacrifice. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Say to the people of Israel, any one of the people of Israel, or the strangers who sojourn in Israel, who gives any of his children to Moloch, shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I myself will set my face against that man, and will cut him off from among his people, because he has given one of his children to Moloch, to make my sanctuary unclean and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do at all close their eyes to that man when he gives one of his children to Moloch, and do not put him to death, then I will set my face against that man and against his clan, and will cut them off from among their people, him and all who follow him in whoring after Moloch. If a person turns to mediums and necromancers, whoring after them, I will set my face against that person, and I will cut him off from among his people. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. Keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. For anyone who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother, his blood is upon him. And now to finish off, just a bonus verse from the next section. The next section is called Punishments for Sexual Immorality, and this is still God speaking here. If a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Okay, so with this first one, we're focusing on chapter 6 of Leviticus here, and this is, if a person turns to mediums and necromancers, whoring after them, I will set my face against that person, and I will cut him off from amongst his people. Now, this is an admission that necromancy exists. And this is why when some people talk about the raising of Jesus and say, oh, this was such a unique thing, and this is why I think he's God. First of all, that makes assumptions that it actually happened. But even if you think it happened, you go to the Bible itself. And people raising from the dead was not an uncommon thing. It wasn't so unusual. Even in some of the tellings of the gospel, of the raising of Jesus, there's 3 different tellings of this that are disparate in their actual content. One of them has a situation where many graves were opened and there were many people that were previously dead walking around Jerusalem. And you have these situations where they're admitting that there's mediums and necromancers that were committing these acts of magic and things like that. So why would you even put them if this is not existing? I don't tell you right now, oh, if you go after dragon slayers instead of coming to me to find some security for your home, then I'm not going to actually follow you, because I don't think dragon slayers exist. But when you have God talking about Moloch, which is a different god, a different demon or whatnot, and then necromancers, mediums, that's giving some admission that these things in the mind of this being actually exist. So what do you think is the context of it here? And with that bonus section, it's another interesting section that you guys can read on your own. It's punishments for sexual immorality. And there's an interesting part in here that also talks about some admonition for sleeping with a female during her menstrual cycle. Now, that would just be a thing of hygiene and things like that. But there is a certain interest on obsession and not obsession, let me not say obsession. Obsession is an overused term. There's a certain interest in the female reproductive system. And these were things that people just didn't know. We weren't completely familiar with what exactly is going on in these situations. People didn't have the knowledge of these things. So it could have seemed strange. And there's also that one line, that one joke that I think is kind of funny. I don't trust anything that bleeds for 5 days and doesn't die. Now, there were some situations of that, and there's a love-hate relationship with women in the Bible and in most religions. Now, of course, you can talk about people like Eve who set us against this whole situation, fall from grace and things like that in the Garden of Eden, the Delilah and the story of Samson and things like that. But then you get religions like Christianity, which hold Mary as a human that's worshipped. She's one of the few humans that has been elevated to that deific state without having to raise into heaven, just by giving birth and being this pure being. Yes, you can say, oh, she has to be a virgin to do this, but supposedly she had kids after that, right? I mean, is that actually established? I don't know. But anyway, so that situation is in there. I'm not one of the people who just thinks, oh, the Bible is just anti-women all the way. No, there's some parts positive, some parts negative. And also men aren't treated that well into it. It's just these people just didn't treat human beings as well as human beings do today. When you're like, oh, go kill all the men, but then keep all the wives, kill all the virgins as your wives. Which one's worse? Being massacred or kept as a slave and then a wife or concubine in that kind of situation? Which one would you prefer? I don't know. It's 2 bad situations. I'm not going to choose one right now. But I will say there is a tendency for females in general to be more religious. Even if it's just a few percentages more, they seem to be more religious than men. Now, why is it? Are you saying women are just too dumb to realize that this stuff is anti-women, or do they find some kind of appreciation in it? And when it comes to this situation of after the massacre, there is a situation of war brides that you can look into, that they think the men who are supposed to protect us and maintain our society have been defeated by these other men in this other society, and they could switch allegiances. You see this in the animal kingdom. The lion comes in, takes over the pride, kills all the kids and things like that. The lion has to stick with him. Now, humans are different, but we are animals, and these things are familiar somehow. But now, let's go into the section containing verse 27. This section is called, You Shall Be Holy, and it starts at verse 22. I think this is still God speaking. You shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my rules, and do them, that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. And you shall not walk in the customs of the nation that I am driving out before you. For they did all these things, and therefore I detested them. But I have said to you, You shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has separated you from the peoples. You shall therefore separate the clean beast from the unclean, and the unclean bird from the clean. You shall not make yourselves detestable by beast or by bird, or by anything which the ground crawls, which I have set apart from you to hold unclean. You shall be holy to me, for I the Lord am holy, and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine. A man or woman who is a medium or a necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones. Their blood shall be upon them. Okay, so there we have it. Now, as I said, that was verse 27 that we're focusing on, which is a man or woman who is a medium or a necromancer shall surely be put to death, and they shall be stoned with stones, and their blood shall be upon them. Now, this is stoning people. And if you really think this didn't happen, it did happen. When the Spanish Inquisition and other people decided to do those things, they were following these kind of rules and these kind of directions. Now, what is the context here? Are you saying, okay, we're going to take it out of context when he's talking about I've put you aside? Because some people say we are the chosen people of God. Is that not true? Are you going to say that's not in the right context because he says that here? Now, he's talking about the beast and the bird. Well, birds are beasts, but we didn't have that taxonomy. We didn't know those things about animals and how close they were in that situation. What's the difference? Now we're talking about things that crawl on the ground. This is insects or just snakes. Now there is an aversion for some people from eating insects, and there is some positives to switching towards insects, but some people might have an aversion to it due to religious interest with this. But it could be a positive way to get protein and a positive way to go towards the future. And I think where people will get less religious in some sense and just be more appreciative of certain things and try different things. There's some things we eat here in Nairobi, Kenya, these termites called teswa, and I think in Kiluya, and they come out of these big holes, and you can mix it with these mushrooms, and it's pretty tasty. They normally dried, and then you fry them with the mushrooms and some sauce and things like that. I don't mind them. I haven't really had too many other insects. I'm not really looking to have them. There's still beef and things like that, so I'm still okay with that. But there's some things in here that some people have objections towards things like Islam, because they're talking about some of these things. But there's some very similar things here, talking about you shall not actually do the things that happen in this land that we go to. Now we're talking about should people integrate into the United States of America? And they're saying, no, if you come there and you drive those people out, you drove out the natives in that kind of sense, now you establish Christianity and that's yours. But then now people come and they believe in their religions too, and they say, no, we don't want to integrate into your thing. But they say, oh, that's a horrible thing. Why do you want to stick with that? You go back to your land, you go back to your place. I guess you can say finders keepers and you're still keeping it, but you can understand why some people are coming with that mentality saying, we don't want to change. Our God has given us. We are the chosen people of our God. And due to that, we're not going to change the way we're going to believe about these things. And this is why there recently was this agreement or proposed agreement between Donald J. Trump of the United States of America and Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, and this proposed Palestinian deal. I was like, it's not going to work. No matter what kind of dealings you have, if you have this situation where Jerusalem is given to the Israelis, it's not going to stick. It's not going to work because of the religious background to it. They think their God gave them this land. So they're not just going to be like, okay, it's still close by, our embassy is still going to be there. It's a 50-mile radius from the place. We can still go visit it. There's still going to be open rules for us to go there. But no, it has to be in the hands of those religious people for them to fulfill this kind of prophecy that they have, and this kind of it's things that, to me, we need to reduce these things. We need to get them out of our lives and get to more sensible things and move on forward as a human species, as earthlings. Okay, now back to the reading, and this is going to be the last one that I read with context, and I'm going to be talking about 1 Chronicles chapter 10, verse 13 to 14 is what I'm going to be focusing on, but I shall start reading from verse 10 all the way through to 14. This section is called The Death of Saul and His Sons. Verse 10. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines, and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and mistreat me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died. Thus Saul died, he and his 3 sons, and all his house died together. And when all the men of Israel, who were in the valley, saw that the army had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. The next day when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they stripped him, and took his head and his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines, to carry the good news to their idols and to their people. And they put his armor in the temple of their gods, and fastened his head in the temple of Dagon. But when all Jabesh Gilead heard all that the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and took away the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons, and brought them to Jabesh. And they buried their bones under the oak in Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. So Saul died for his breach of faith. He broke faith with the Lord, in that he did not keep the command of the Lord, and he also consulted a medium, seeking guidance. He did not seek guidance from the Lord. Therefore the Lord put him to death, and turned the kingdom of David over to the son of Jesse. So there we have it. And you see, here's the context. These are contexts to following these things, to going to mediums. And we have a lot of people right now. I personally know a lot of Christians who go to fortune tellers, who go to these people, read the horoscopes and things like this, who go to these other places to find the meaning and things like that. This means the definition of Christian has changed. You talk to many different Christians and say, okay, what do you define as Christians? They'll tell you different things. I think the base thing is some admission that Jesus Christ was a deity born of Mary, whether it's a virgin or whatever, and died and went up to heaven. I think that's a key part of it. And the God deity that Jesus also was the creator of existence. I think that's kind of the two things that you kind of have to believe in. Now, how much you take about the things, it's give and take with a lot of people. And I'm glad it's give and take, because there's some things in the Bible that if people actually lived by, we'd be living in a horrendous world. I think we'd be better off to drop all of it and find better ways to do it. One thing I suggest, the non-aggression principle. Just don't initiate force against people. That's just a good basis to start with, and we can see where we go from there. Now, that was the last one, the context. And the context here to me is showing that, look, you can lose your entire kingdom by going to these other things. That's how key this whole situation of a medium, of witches, of these other ways, these other people who are saying they can do things that are supposedly just for God. So following God, if you don't follow him, you can lose everything. You can lose your entire kingdom. You can die in this situation. God will turn away from you. So I think that's a big admonition to follow. So for people to just say, oh, no, you're taking that out of context. What's the context you see with that? Okay, now I'm going to read a few verses and things that I think lead to certain questions, and I'm going to go into some where some things kind of show the admission of certain things existed. These ones I'm just going to give some quick points on them, And as I said, I'm going to be focusing on the specific verses themselves. You can go in and read the context, so you can let me know in the comment section what you think about this. Okay, so Ezekiel chapter 13, verse 18. And say, thus says the Lord, woe to the women who sew magic bands upon their wrists, and make veils for the heads of persons of every stature, in the hunt for souls. Will you hunt down souls belonging to my people, and keep your own souls alive? Now, with this one, I was kind of thinking, is this anti things like Kabbalah? I think this Kabbalah is a thing that I think Madonna follows, where you tie that little red rope around your wrist, red string or something. And I've seen other people do this. And then there's other things with like trinkets, charm bracelets, or just other kind of trinkets, maybe even magic rabbit's foot. Just having these other charms and sort of girl-like trinkets and accessories. Is this against that? Is this saying, oh, if you're holding these, you're a negative person, you're going against God's will, God's way? What do you think is the context for that? That's a question that is raised in my head. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10 to 12. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. Now, the thing that was leading to some questions here was I saw several verses, and I'm thinking this is a very positive thing about not killing your sons, not giving sacrifices. But as I mentioned before, there was one talking about you give your first son to me. What did that necessarily mean? And then, of course, there's also this from Genesis 22. Sometime later, God tasted Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, who you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. So now a quick summary of what happens in the story. This is probably familiar to some of you may not be completely familiar with it, but Abraham acquiesces to this. He's a bit apprehensive, but he decides to go forward. He has his servants help him, then his servants get him to the location. He's like, okay, leaves the servants down there, we're going to go up and pray, and he takes Isaac with him. Isaac is wondering, we've done all this preparation for sacrifice, and if he knows about these preparations for sacrifice, then God was talking about not giving burnt offerings, but why is Isaac familiar with burnt offerings? And you can say it's over a time thing. Okay, anyway, so he's like, okay, what are we sacrificing? And then Abraham's like, no, God will supply a lamb. And then they go up there. Abraham binds Isaac down to the sacrificial altar, and all this situation happens. And then when he's about to stab him, when he's about to cut him open or start the whole process, then first of all, if I'm thinking of as a scriptwriter, as a creative and things like this, and this, of course, is a kind of foreshadowing thing, and this is the thing. The Bible was written in different sections over a lot of time. So if someone sees this story and is like, oh, we can use this as a callback, I mean, when Jesus comes and he sacrificed himself in that blood sacrifice situation, that could be a callback to this situation, and it makes sense in that kind of situation. And also one thing, if Jesus is God's only son, and we are all God's children, then are we all girls? But anyway, so coming back to this situation. So God says, okay, he stops him and he says, okay, Abraham. You don't have to go through this. I believe that you fear me now. God's like, I get that you fear me. You did hold from me your only son. So I get that you fear me. And what is this? Now, what is going on in this story? And this is part of why I detest when people have that proud declaration of saying, I am God-fearing. And yeah, I think about this. If this is the kind of God he thinks exists, then I guess it would be wise to be afraid of this. Because evil should be something that elicits fear in people. And this is an evil act to do this situation. Okay, now we're going to move on to just some quick things where I'm talking about certain things that are referred to as existing. Because you wouldn't talk about these things if you didn't think they actually existed. I don't think you would. Why would you even mention them? Okay, so talking animals. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, Did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? So this is the whole snake situation. And I don't think there's an actually part where they say the snake is Satan. It's just a talking snake. But what language did that snake speak? Was it parcel tongue? I think there was a situation where somebody brought up the whole Harry Potter situation and were like, it's devilish. This was a Christian who was like, it's devilish because the snake is speaking Nagini or whatever, or the whole like parcel tongue thing with Harry Potter. That is definitely a thing I remember hearing. Correct me if I'm wrong. Not going to look it up. But anyway, next one, transmutation. Exodus chapter 7, verse 12. For each man cast down his staff, and they became serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Now, this is a situation where great film, the Charlton Heston Ten Commandments film. I still remember watching this as a kid and was really amazed with the effects when they had the pillar of fire, they had the water being split. These are an amazing film. And I still think as literature, as historical part of what has made humanity humanity, these things are still valuable. But it's talking about transmutation here. And I've also mentioned how with transmutation, whether it's this kind of thing, people actually turning sticks into snakes and things like that, or you get the situation where Jesus goes and he turns the 5 loaves into 50 loaves and that kind of situation and feeds all these people, or changing water into wine. Transmutation is a thing that's common in religions. And this is why I'm saying something like communism, socialism also would require some kind of transmutation to do away with the price calculation problem, just talking about, we're just going to have enough things to just redistribute to everyone. So these things kind of exist. They're kind of there. You can't talk about socialism like, there's limitations in what we can have and make fun of them. And then you go on and you believe that transmutation is a thing that can exist. If God can just give you guidance on things, then why can't a socialist say, we'll just pray to God and he'll tell us what the price of the goods is supposed to be? Okay, next one, possession. In Acts chapter 16, verse 16 to 18. As we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a slave girl who had a spirit of divination and brought her owners much gain by fortune-telling. She followed Paul and us, crying out, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to you the way of salvation." And this she kept doing for many days. Paul, having become greatly annoyed, turned and said to the spirits, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out that very hour. So in this situation, he's talking about spirits. She was possessed by some spirits, and the spirits actually worked, supposedly, somehow, because they had given the owners much gain by actual fortune telling. So they're kind of stating that the fortune telling was actually working because of these spirits, and Paul could just name the name of Christ, just call to the name of Christ, and those demons, those possessions, whatever was in her, left. That spirit just left. So this thing of spirits and possession, that was a common thing. Now this is going to be Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 9 to 14. This section is called Abominable Practices. And I think this is God speaking. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his sons or daughters as an offering, anyone who practices divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For these nations, which you are about to dispossess, listen to the fortune tellers and to the diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do this. So this is the context that I'm talking about here. Again, he's mentioning their sorcerers, their fortune tellers, their necromancers, people inquiring and talk to the dead. And then you have this right now. You have a lot of people who go on TV and they do that cold reading thing. It's cold reading, but people say, we're going to talk to your actual kids. I think there was something they just recently saw in the Goop thing with Gwyneth Paltrow. She was talking about this thing on Netflix where she goes and talks to diviners and people can speak to the dead. This is a common thing. Now, how many people are going out and saying, okay, these are people that we actually need to stop because our God says so? I think they need to be stopped because they're just lying in general. But I don't think they're lying any more than a preacher. They're doing their own religious thing and they're doing their own woo. They're doing their own feels and faith-based things. So why would you mock them for that and then you hold on to yours in this one end? And then here again with the repetition saying, you don't go and integrate with these people. You believe in your God. Your God has set this way of doing things. So this idea of dropping this and adopting what somebody else might be doing that might be more positive, you already have that block. So you're not even weighing them. You're like, no, what you're doing is negative because of how you came to it, instead of trying to actually absorb and see what are these people doing. Can we actually learn and adjust to these things? And this whole situation, you shall be blameless before the Lord your God. This is kind of saying, hey, whatever you do, this is in my plan. I'm letting you do this. So you don't really have to blame. You don't really have to worry about keeping slaves from these people. Get the slaves from the people around you, from the tribes around you that don't believe in me, because you're not blameless for this. The Lord your God is giving you the opportunity to do these things. Okay, now we're going to talk about magicians. It's going to be 2 verses, or a couple of selections. Exodus 7, chapter 22. But the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. So this is the kind of situation here. In the film, in the book, in the Bible, there was a battle here. It was like Pokemon battle or Yu-Gi-Oh or whatever. These kind of magic battles. They're just standoffs where it was the Egyptians magicians against Moses, against Aaron in this situation. They had this tit for tat competition thing, as you're talking about. So there's an admission, supposedly from God, that other people could do magic, could do similar things with changing reality and transmutation that God Himself could do, that somebody with God's power could do. So this was a common thing. People thought this. This was a regular thing that people thought was actually existing in this time. And there's also this situation with the Pharaoh, his heart remaining hardened. There was a part where the Pharaoh was ready to listen to what Moses had said and let God's people go. But then God was like, nah, you didn't listen to me before, so I'm going to harden your heart so I can punish you more and do the whole like killing of your sons. And I guess like you talked about before, you have to give that first son to God. He was like, yeah, give the first son. I'm going to take that first son. You go put blood over the doors of all the Jews and people like that, the chosen people. And the other people, I'm taking those first sons. They're coming to me whether you like them or not. Okay, Acts chapter 8, verse 9 to 11. But there was a man named Simon, who had previously practiced magic in the city and amazed the people of Samaria, saying that he himself was somebody great. They all paid attention to him, from the least to the greatest, saying, this man is the power of God that is called great. And they paid attention to him, because for a long time he had amazed them with his magic. Now here, of course, they're not talking about the specific magic that he was doing. Maybe it's just magic tricks. Are they talking about just your regular magicians right now, your street magicians? And this thing, growing up, I was reading the Bible. I was taught to believe, trying to believe, and I think I did believe this stuff, that these miracles did exist. They were talking about magicians. They were talking about these things. So when I saw magicians like Penn and Teller and these performance ones in Vegas, and so this one with some bubbles and things like this. Anyway, when I saw these magicians doing their magic, I actually thought there was magic. There was an ability to do these things. I actually believed in these fantasy type of things that were actually real. I thought this was an actual thing that could exist. So in this situation, what were they talking about? Just the people doing magic tricks? Or are they talking about actual magic powers and things like that? Now to finish off, we're going to go with dragons. And appropriately in the last book of Revelations, which is a very powerful book. I think I read it first when it was before I was 10, and it was really powerful stuff. So let's get to the reading. Chapter 20, verse 2, the 1,000 years. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and then threw him into the pit and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he may not deceive the nations any longer, until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a while. Then I saw the thrones. Seated on them were those whom the authority to judge was committed. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until those 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, and they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. So with this, and I've been making this observation, talking about this lately, the comparisons that this whole situation, this end day prophecies, are a popular thing in human history. It's a thing we've had. Climate hysteria is just a contemporary version. It's the contemporary version that the metheist religions of statism have. It's this preoccupation with the awareness that we have of death and this want to have some knowledge of what happens after. This fear of just being like, I don't know what happens after. Or this fear of just being like, we might just be it. That might end, but that's still glorious in its own way. But you have this situation where they're talking about actual times, and you have here again dragon, the ancient serpent. And I think with this one, this might be part of why people think that serpent in the book of Genesis is Satan, but it's never directly mentioned. But Satan is sometimes referred to as the serpent, and this tradition sees the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, bound him for 1,000 years. So he's put away for 1,000 years while Jesus is reigning. And this whole situation where they're talking about, be a martyr. If you're a martyr and you actually die for your faith, you're going to be raised again and get to lead, get to rule over the world in some way, along with Jesus and things like that. So that's something for people to look forward to. It gives some people some oomph to actually go there. Now, I recently found out that with the Catholic Church, there was a situation where they brought in the whole situation where you go to hell or you get damned, where suicide is a sin, because some people were thinking, hey, if we are Christian and we actually go to heaven in the next world, their current state of life was so much worse than what they imagined, and they were just committing suicide. And they're like, okay, no, if you commit suicide, you're going to go to hell. So there is something about that. Look into that, see if that's right. I'll check it out later. But let's finish off with the defeat of Satan, picking back up at verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth. Gog and Magog will gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea. And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil, who had deceived them, was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were. And they will be tormented day and night, forever and ever. So there you have it. And I think this is one of the clearest things about the hell being hellfire forever and ever. Now, it doesn't necessarily say everyone's meant to be here. Talking about the false prophet, I guess this is a person who's supposed to rise up. According to some Christians, when Obama came up, he was supposed to be the Antichrist, the false prophet. So the Antichrist is a separate being from Satan, but is in league with Satan. And you see, there are some specifications where they're the ones being tormented. So this whole situation where, okay, every human's will be tormented in hell, I don't know if that's necessarily a thing, but there is something about religions, be it the current progressive religion or Christianity, that think humans are fallen beings. We are faulty for just living. We have that original sin, or just the regular things that we do to live are inherently sinful, inherently wrong, inherently needing fixing. I have no problem with saying, yes, we should strive to be better, strive to do things in a better way, strive to continue and be more harmonious and be more helpful. But I'm good with that. I think we are doing that. There's more humans alive today than ever been in known history. I think more humans being alive is a positive thing. Yet for some people, reducing humans right now is positive. For some people, if supposedly some god being came alive tomorrow and this whole 1,000 years started, they would be happy about that. I would not be. I don't think that's a positive thing to reduce the world to 1,000 people that end up living, and then however many are living in that town, and then anyway. So these are the things. These people are obsessed with these end world counts. They're people who are obsessed with Armageddon, obsessed with the end of the world. This stuff is in the book. This stuff is there. If you believe this stuff is true, how does it affect your life? This whole idea that you can just have a personal God, I think it's a bit BS. This stuff bleeds into the rest of your life. If you go out there and you start saying, we're going to start stoning witches because it's in the Bible, who are you to say they're wrong? If they actually decide to do that, who are you to say they're wrong? Was the Spanish Inquisition wrong for what they did? If you think yes, like I do, why do you think they're wrong if you do believe that this is a book from God, who the Spanish people in the Spanish Inquisition said they believed and were doing his work? Then there's people, burning witches in the United States of America in the early times. they were doing God's work and things like that. They were reading stuff in the Bible and saying, hey, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to kill these people. So who are you as a Christian, as a believer, to say they shouldn't do this? Who are you as a believer of a faith to say, okay, my faith is right, but these other people listen to their faith and their God telling them to do these things, that these people were heathens and non-believers and stone these people for X, Y, Z. Why are they evil for doing that, yet you are supposed to be good for not listening to what your God tells you to do to some of those very same sort of people? So anyway, that's it for now. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm probably going to do this with a few other things. There's a few other things I want to bring up, but I'm trying to do situations where if I'm going to do a long video like this with a reading or some kind of analysis in this kind of situation, I have some kind of specific illustration to go with it. And with this one, there's going to be merch up at the merchandise store. You can find it on Redbubble. You can go to rantathon.wordpress.com and you'll find links to my store there. It's Anuma Salis. On Redbubble, you can find different kind of merchandise there. I'll leave a link below to the merchandise, and there'll probably be a link below to this webpage of openbible.info where you can read these things for yourselves. And please let me know, whether you're a Christian or a believer of something else or not a believer or anything, let me know what you think about the context of some of these things and the applications. Or if you're a believer, let me know why you don't believe these are things that you should actually live by. Or do you actually do secretly want to bring back the Spanish Inquisition? Like, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Or what are you going to call it when you do it? Anyway, goodbye.